Welcome everybody. I hope you're doing fine wherever you are. My name is Janneke Plantger. I'm the Diversity Dean of Utrecht University, and it is my privilege to open this first online version of International Women's Day at Utrecht University. The celebration of the 8th of March as International Women's Day goes back a long time. In fact, it dates from the beginning of the 20th century, as the first Women's Day was organized in New York in 1909. So you might think, gee, it's 2021. Do we still need to celebrate this? Isn't it something of the past? At the level of the UU, we strongly believe that it's still important to acknowledge the importance of International Women's Day and to reflect on the still existing gender gaps and inequalities. The impact of the corona crisis also does not seem to be neutral in gender terms. The pandemic has shown the potential of a digital workforce, but working from home has also increased the complexities of a work-life balance, especially for women with young children. Recent data from the European Institute for Gender Equality, AG, indicates that women's share of unpaid work has increased, despite men taking on more care responsibilities than before. Online schooling represents a new form of unpaid care for parents, especially for women who are more involved in the virtual classroom with children. Here, the AG data indicates that, and I quote, "Mothers have to deal with interruptions by children more often than fathers when teleworking. Constant distractions and extra care responsibilities for women lowers their productivity and could reduce career progression and pay." End of quote. In fact, within academia, there is the first evidence that less female-authored articles are sent to journals to enter the process of reviewing and publishing. So yes, in 2021, it is still extremely important to share with all of you our research on gender equality, to discuss our policy initiatives, and to start debates with students, alumni, employees, and all interested parties involved, how Utrecht University can become more equal in gender terms. Now, the topic of today is unboxing gender. And with this topic, we hope to start the conversation about pigeonholing, stereotyping, and gender bias. And of course, we're all familiar with the temptation of pigeonholing and stereotyping, because thinking in neatly described and well-ordered categories is easy, convenient, and comfortable. Yet, as Gunnar Dillema stated in last week's interview at the DUB, the core of inclusiveness is daring to embrace the discomfort and to learn from each other. Therefore, with a varied program, we offer a platform for research that is outside the box. And we organize meetings where you are invited to stand in someone else's shoes. This morning, a Wikipedia editathon was organized in which we tried to narrow the gender gap in Wikipedia. And this afternoon, we have, for example, a panel on the pros and cons of gender registration, and the Rosanna Fund will award 3 grants for women. There are informal meetings, there's an interactive theater session, and we hope to close this day with a talk show organized together with Studium Generale on missing voices in literature and the media. Now let me take this opportunity to thank all involved in organizing this day. I know it's a lot of work, and to a large extent invisible, especially given this online celebration. So, thank you all very, very much. It is highly appreciated. Now let me finish with a short introduction of our next speakers, Belle Derks and Yerkes. Belle Derks is professor at the Department of Social Health and Organizational Psychology at Utrecht University, and Yerkes is associated professor at the Department of Interdisciplinary Social Sciences, also at Utrecht University. And they are both well known for their work on gender equality related to work, the family, and the organization. Belle and Mara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Janneke, for this nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be here today and to talk to you about how we can support the careers of women. And I will try to focus on individual policies, but also on the bigger picture and how we can bring those two closer together. I am co-chair of the Gender and Diversity Hub of Utrecht University, a platform where researchers that study diversity and inclusion teams get together and meet up with stakeholders to discuss diversity and inclusiveness issues in their companies. And you can follow us on Twitter and on our website. Before I continue, I would like to ask you at home to think about the diversity initiatives that you see in your own organization to increase gender equality. And maybe you can share them in the chat so that we can come back to them later in the Q&A. So first of all, International Women's Day. There's a lot to celebrate this year. When we focus on the academic context, again, there are more female professors than last year. We have now climbed to 24% women professors. We see the same when we look at the female board index. Again, more women in the boards of companies, over 30%, or 30% women in non-executive boards and 13% in executive boards of our large companies. And also, when we look at politics, it is interesting to see that we finally have more political party leaders that are women, 10 in the next elections. What has also been interesting in the media is that in the whole corona crisis situation, you sometimes see in the media that it's emphasized that women leaders actually have done quite well in the past year, and that countries with women on the top levels of the countries, so women prime ministers, have done exceptionally well. And I will get back to this later on in my talk, what is going on here. However, under the surface, a lot still is going on that we need to fix. Because if we look, for example, at these female professors, yes, now we have over 24% female professors. But if you look at the development, in the last year, the increase of women professors was a lot less than the year before, when there was much more done to improve that, for example, with the Westerdijk impulse. And also, if you look at how women and men are distributed across science, then yeah, okay, we have 24% female professors, but that is compared to over 50% of female graduates. So we need to improve that. Similarly, yeah, we have more women in politics now, but recent research shows that they face more negative feedback and negative experiences, daily abuse on social media. And more and more research is showing that, yeah, we have more women in positions of power, but what are their experiences? They often don't feel welcome. They feel that they need to fit in to a mold that was already there. So what can be done to improve that? Finally, this year of COVID-19, it's of course clear, as Janneke already mentioned, and as Mara will discuss in her talk, that the external shock of the corona crisis has also increased gender inequality and seems to have hit women harder than men. So in our own research, I would like to give you an example of how we look at this larger organizational culture problem, if you will. So, for example, we have studied, myself together with Rut van Velen, how women and men in academia perceive what we call occupational stereotype. What do you need to be like in order to be successful in academia? And what we found is that our image of what it takes to be successful in academia is a very masculine image, consisting of traits that we stereotypically more associate with men, like being competitive, assertive, self-confident. And these kinds of traits were found in our study among over 4,000 Dutch academics to be more important, they thought, than being communal, being focused on the community, being cooperative, being a good colleague, things like that. And this creates a lack of fit. Because the agency that is emphasized in our image of what you need to be like to be successful in academia, and I think this happens in many organizations, is a stereotype that we associate much more strongly with men. So this means that when we have this image of you need to be very competitive and agentic to be successful, that we're more likely to recognize this talent in men than we are in women. And we found in our research that actually many academics experience a lack of fit, where they feel that they are not agentic enough to make it in academia. But we found that this lack of fit that you can see below is especially large among junior female academics. And this might explain the leaky pipeline, the higher exit numbers of young women in academia, because in our research we also found that people who experience this lack of fit, academics who feel that they're not agentic enough to make it in academia, are more likely to report low work engagement, high stress levels, low professional identification, which means that you don't identify as much with being an academic, a lower career confidence, higher work stress, and finally, higher turnover intentions. So this study we did gives an example of how a larger organizational culture problem can make some people feel less welcome and less able to build a career there. And this is actually the point, one of the points that I would like to make today, that gender inequality might be like a seven-headed monster. This is also the perspective of the Gender and Diversity Hub, where we perceive gender inequality to be a larger system, sort of a moving target, that when you cut one of the heads of the monster, another one will appear. So let me give you an example of this. When we think about sexism and gender inequality, in the past, we have focused mainly on explicit sexism, the old boys network, ideas that women were just not good enough to build a career. And I think most of you will think, well, this is something of the past. You see less of this nowadays, and that's true. But still, now we see more implicit forms of bias, where women are less associated with leadership, because we expect leadership from men rather than from women, to give an example. And women are more likely, research shows, to be asked to prove again and again and again whether they can actually be a good leader. Interestingly, research shows that women are better leaders, but we think this is because they have to show more leadership talent before they actually are selected for that role. And then responses to that are often, or at first, are often focused on fixing these women. What can we do to help women to make it in a very masculine, competitive organization? And then you see that the stereotypes or the bias changes, that we don't evaluate the same behavior from men and women in the same way. That when women are agentic, that we think, well, she's a bitch. But when men are agentic, we think, well, that's our leader, that's what we want to see. And also that now the onus has become, the focus has become more on, well, women just don't have what it takes to make it, so we need to fix the women. For example, women don't ask, we have to give them negotiation courses. When we fix that, there are still these issues of that women don't have the same role models, that they don't feel that they fit in, and that they are worry more whether they have what it takes. And lately, what you see more and more now is that people start to say again, yeah, but maybe men and women are just very different. Maybe they have natural, inborn differences in interests, in intellect, and we should allow women and men to be different. Women may have other ambitions, and recently more and more what I've seen is, well, maybe women are better leaders because they are different leaders than men. And although this is a very positive stereotype, it's still a stereotype that puts women in a position to be the kind of a different kind of leader than men are. Of course, another part of gender inequality that's quite difficult to solve is that even when women don't have kids, people expect them to have kids, so that affects how they the opportunities that they are given to develop their career. And then when they do have children, they have this balance to make, like, are you a good employee, but also are you a good mother? And many organizations focus only on family work policies on women, whereas taking care of your family is something that is also an issue for men. And finally, companies that try to work to improve gender equality, there is sort of a momentum. And after a while, companies are worn out. They think, well, we already do a lot. Gender inequality is a thing of the past, something that we solved. Nowadays, maybe men are discriminated more than women are. So, then when you look at the current diversity and inclusion actions, and here your chats come in. I'm very curious to see what you chat, but I can't see it right now. I will see later. When you look at the diversity and inclusion actions that are very popular, you see that many of these solutions focus on individuals within the system. So I hope that I have convinced you that this gender inequality issue is a systemic issue, but diversity and inclusion actions often focus on the individuals within the system. So, for example, you can create mentoring programs to boost confidence of women, courses for women on how to negotiate, network, present, and there are, of course, women networks that are very popular. Stop-the-clock policies that allow women to take more time to build their CV before they are up for tenure. And I'm not saying that these these initiatives are useless, but you have to agree with me, or you don't have to. They really focus on the women themselves. And there are also other very popular things like implicit bias training or active bystander training that hope to improve the culture within an organization. But what, in our perspective, is an issue with these policies is that they either focus on the women, fixing the women, it's women's problem, so it's their work to solve it, or they focus on individuals within an organization without actually changing the system. And for example, a very popular thing right now is implicit bias training, and researchers at Utrecht University have made a great fact sheet about what is good and what is bad about this implicit bias training, because this implicit bias training offers a very easy way to address sexism without casting blame, without blaming anyone or leveling involvement. Or giving critique on the institution. And indeed, some research shows that there are positive short-term effects of implicit bias training because it makes people more aware, it motivates people to be less biased. But in the fact sheet that my colleagues at Utrecht University, Melissa Fink, Wiebren Jansen, Janneke van der Toor, Naomi Ellemers and others developed, it is stated very clearly that there are downsides, like, yeah, you can teach people that they have implicit bias, but it only works if you also tell them how to fight these biases. And many trainings actually don't do that. It focuses on individuals rather than institutional problems. It may reduce the sense of responsibility, and this is something that I hear a lot, actually, that people say, well, everyone is biased, so I can't really help myself. Well, and then you achieve the opposite than what you're trying to achieve. By talking about the implicit stereotypes, if you leave it at that, you're actually discussing stereotypes about women being less competent, for example, which also creates and emphasizes these stereotypes even more. And finally, we know from research that when companies do a little bit of diversity initiatives, that gives a false sense of, well, we've fixed this. So only doing implicit bias trainings is not a good idea. And there we get at this gap between what we as the university, as theorists, are saying, like what should we do, and what practitioners are trying to do. So diversity initiatives are often criticized for focusing too much on the individual, increasing women's inclusion in a social order that we're not going to change. And that's a problem, of course. However, research and theory points to more systemic problems, but it's very difficult to say if we need transformational change and disrupt the current system, how are we going to do that? Where do we start? And here I would like to end with a suggestion of how we can do that, because of course that's very difficult. But there are some ways of thinking about it differently that may help us improve the situation in the future. So researchers at Radboud University Nijmegen have proposed this bifocal approach, where you focus not only on the system, but also on the individuals within the system. And what they say is that the main challenge of practitioners and theorists is to come together and create gender equality programs that are sustainable, but also anchored in the day-to-day practices. And the bifocal approach tries to focus on what can you do with individuals, and also how does that actually change the system. So what they try to do here is develop gender insights and develop the change agency of individuals within organizations, hereby contributing to a real transformation. And they have a couple of design principles that may help us to improve the gender equality policies that we currently have. And in essence, what they do is they say for many organizations, diving into or working towards diversity and inclusion can be experienced as a dive at the deep end of a pool. And what we need to do is to help organizations get into the water, get to the deep end where we're actually going to change things, but start at the shallow end. So how do we do that? We need to be guided by this vision that we need to change the organization, but we need to dispense with these scary, radical, blue sky interventions that are just very scary to organizations. And we need to begin with the local gendered knowledges and the interventions that already exist in organizations and work with them to improve. So focus on creating movement towards the transformative, towards the deep end of the pool, and engage with men and women in building gender insights and capacity to act for change. So try to find those people in the organization that are going to be change agents and work with them in the long term. And maintain this focus on both individual development and organizational change. And they give a very nice example in their article about a mentoring program, which quickly can become something that is for women only, but that you can improve with this bifocal approach to, if you also include, for example, male executives who have something to say in the organizations, who can be part of this mentoring effort, who learn from their female subordinates what is going on in the organization, and who can become change agents. And I think with many diversity initiatives, you can think, how can we work with this initiative to actually increase change in the organization? That's where I would like to leave it today. And I would like to give the floor to Mara to talk about how COVID has affected this.
Thanks, Bella. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone this afternoon. And I'm not wearing my heels, which is why I need a little bit of help stepping up and seeing over to see all of you. So, in this past week, in preparation for International Women's Day, I noticed a common theme on Twitter. Our well-respected senior scholars studying gender the world over were preparing for today, wondering whether their message should be one of inspiration or one of rage. Many responses to these tweets suggest now is a time for rage. that inspiration and collaborative effort have not been enough to challenge structural gender inequalities. Against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, this frustration, this anger, this rage even, might be understandable. Because around the globe, as Janneke and Belle have already mentioned, the structural inequalities evident prior to the pandemic have, in most cases, been magnified. For example, in paid work. A recent article from colleague Renze Nieuwenhuis and myself shows that the economic consequences of the pandemic are widely expected to be most detrimental to those who already had a more precarious position, either inside or outside the labor market. And this is a position more often held by women than by men. Current estimates from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development suggest that the magnitude of job loss during the current pandemic will far exceed that of the Great Recession of 2008. Women lose out in multiple ways, through job loss, reduced income, or through implicit disadvantage. For example, when they've experienced multiple career breaks, impacting their eligibility for job protection schemes that should protect against economic disadvantage during the crisis. In the Netherlands, we've been researching the gendered effects of the pandemic across time in our nationally representative COVID Gender Inequality Survey Netherlands COGIS-NL study, with a great interdisciplinary team of researchers from Utrecht University, the University of Amsterdam, and Radboud University Nijmegen. If we focus for a moment on the impact of the pandemic on parents with children under the age of 18 at home, we found that during the first lockdown, nearly 1 year ago already, mothers were more likely than fathers to adapt the days on which they worked and when they worked, working much more in the evenings and weekends than during their regular working hours. In June, we found that many parents were actually working more hours than prior to the pandemic. In particular, parents working in so-called essential occupations, like healthcare and teaching, were more likely than parents in non-essential occupations to work more hours. We found that in comparison to mothers who didn't work more hours, mothers who did worked more often in essential occupations. Given their overrepresentation in essential occupations, our finding may be not that surprising to many of you. But our most recent, soon-to-be-published findings from November suggest that parents' work hours are actually returning to pre-COVID levels, although some parents continue to work more. Parents who consistently worked more hours in November, just prior to that second harsh lockdown, were more often found in essential occupations. But the previous within-gender difference we found, that is, between mothers who work in essential occupations and mothers who don't, is no longer significant. More time is needed with these data to fully understand the effect of the pandemic on women's labor market position here in the Netherlands. But our evidence suggests that the impact of the pandemic on gender inequality in paid work is complex, offering no simple answers. Maybe then, the potential rage of gender scholars is linked to structural inequality in the home, mentioned by Janneke at the start. This is a situation made visible by academics in the 1970s and 1980s and beyond. In industrialized countries prior to the pandemic, women continued to take on greater shares of caregiving and household tasks. In most countries, the pandemic and measures taken to reduce the spread of the virus, such as the closure of schools and childcare centers, have significantly worsened these inequalities. Indeed, as Renze and I noted in our article, across the globe, women have taken on a greater share of caregiving tasks during the lockdown. The increase in care tasks is increasing mothers' so-called mental load. That is, the invisible work of organizing care, children's activities, organizing the home, and now homeschooling as well. We note that even in countries like Iceland, often seen to be a gender equality utopia, mothers express being confronted with gender inequality at home, highlighted and exacerbated by the pandemic. We mustn't forget, however, the research conducted prior to the pandemic, which suggests men increasingly desire egalitarian relationships and greater involvement in their children's lives. If we take a closer look at the evidence emerging from the pandemic, we see that the impact that the pandemic is having on gender inequality at home has not been universally negative. In countries like the Netherlands and the US, while mothers have taken on additional care and household tasks, some fathers have too. Thus, the potential for a decrease in gender inequality within families remains. In short, within the domain of paid work, as well as within the home, structural gender inequality remains. To understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on gender inequality, it requires us to see inequality in its diverse and multifarious ways, referring back to what Bella just showed with the seven-headed monster. There are multiple inequalities taking on multiple forms, manifested in diverse ways across the globe. When this inequality is so complex, how do we work towards systemic change? Stated differently, what stands in our way? One of the greatest barriers is challenging gendered norms. Gendered norms are shaped by the time and the culture in which we live. They tell us implicitly and explicitly what is expected of us as men, women, and non-binary persons. They silently shape an image in today's society that suggests women are structurally disadvantaged in the labor market of their own accord. In the Netherlands, this phenomenon can be seen, for example, in the idea of deeltijdprinsesjes, that is, part-time princesses, suggesting gender inequality at work and at home is the result of Dutch women's individual choices, seemingly uninfluenced by structural factors. These norms similarly imply that men are happy to work longer hours, be secondary rather than primary caregivers, and somehow that men are more capable of leading organizations and our societies than women. Not under influence of institutions or stereotypes. No, because men are innately better leaders. Challenging this barrier of gendered norms means challenging the status quo, and that's no easy task. Our COGIS-NL study consistently shows that Dutch parents are quite satisfied with the division of care tasks in the pandemic, despite ongoing inequality. As Utrecht University colleague Chantal Remedy and I recently suggested, parent satisfaction with the current situation suggests mothers and fathers might not be motivated to challenge these unequal divisions. In fact, previous research suggests that our perception of situations, unfair situations, as fair, is indeed a crucial barrier to decreasing gender inequality. So how do we challenge inequalities if individuals within this system don't even see them as unfair? That is where our role as academics come in. We have a crucial job to study these inequalities, to show them in all their complexity. Research into gender inequality allows us and others around us to imagine a world in which women and other minorities are not structurally disadvantaged. And while I understand the rage of other gender scholars, and I certainly don't want to discount it, I believe that in order to imagine a more equal and fair system requires inspiration and hope. At a time when polarization seems to be increasing, I drew inspiration and hope from the poem Everything Inhabitable by Marika Lucas Reineveld, published this past weekend in the Volkskrant. The British newspaper The Guardian published an English translation by Michelle Hutchinson, and I quote, "Never lost that resistance, that primal jostling with sorrow and joy, or given in to pulpit preaching, to the word that says what is right or wrong. Never been too lazy to stand up, to face up to all the bullies and fight pigeonholing with your fists raised against those riots of not knowing inside your head, tempering impotence with the red rag in your eyes, and always announcing your own way with rock-solid pride. Watching someone reduced to pulp, seeing the last drop of dignity trickling away. You are against craniometry, against bond service, against all of humankind's boxing in. Never lost that resistance, that seed of wrestling free. Your origin is dressed in mourning attire. Your origin was fortunate. It had an escape route. Not that your experience is aligned, not that you always see that the grass on the other side may be withered and less green. The point is to be able to put yourself in another's shoes, to see the sea of sorrow behind another person's eyes. The rampant wrath of all wraths, you want to say that maybe you don't understand everything, that of course you don't always hit the right chord, but that you do feel it. Yes, you feel it, even if the difference is a gap. Never lost that resistance, and yet able to grasp when it isn't your place. When you must kneel for a poem because another person can make it more inhabitable. Not out of unwillingness, not out of dismay, but because you know there is so much inequality, people still discriminated against. What you want is fraternity. You want one fist, and maybe your hand isn't yet powerful enough. Or maybe you should first take the hand of another in reconciliation. You actively need to feel the hope that you are doing something to improve the world. Though you mustn't forget this. Stand up after kneeling and straighten together our backs. On this International Women's Day, let us together straighten our backs for a more gender-equal world. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Belle. Thank you, Mara. Super interesting, beautiful quote or poem you ended with. I read it as well in the newspaper, and it really gave me the goosebumps. So
thanks.
Thank you for translating as well. So Belle, I think we should start with you. In the beginning of your lecture, you posed the questions to all the listeners, people who were watching. What do they see in their companies? Do they see diversity initiatives? We got a lot of reaction. Not necessarily just people saying we have this and that, but also people really sharing their thoughts about them or having questions. And we got a lot of unconscious bias training. Does that come as a surprise for you?
No, I see it everywhere.
Yeah?
I don't think, depending on how it's done, I think it's a good start. But what I don't like about it is I've also come across that here in our own university that people told me no, but we are fixing it because we now have implicit bias training, and that's really a shame because it's only a start. It's not everything is about implicit bias in gender inequality.
Yeah, I can see that. I also followed one, and I did notice that there were only women as well in there. So that's also maybe a thing.
Yeah, women have implicit bias too. So that's
they
good
do.
too.
Yeah, they do. No, that's definitely true. We also had a question because of your question. It was someone who worked in a very small company, only 5 people. And that person asked, how can I make it more diverse? Because I feel like these trainings are really for big companies or that you're referring to. So do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, well, it depends on what kind of diversity you need. We're talking about gender here today, but I think sometimes when we talk about diversity, especially when we're talking about small groups, it's difficult. So then sometimes it helps to flip the situation around and to talk about homogeneity. And to talk about, are we in our small group of people all thinking in the same direction, voicing the same opinions? Do we feel free to add our diverse perspectives? And that can already be a start. So diversity is not only about having the right puppets at the right places. I mean, even in a group of 5, it can be very clear that if there's only one man, that there's not a lot of gender diversity. But you can also start the conversation by, are we all able and motivated to share our diverse opinions? Because only then we can benefit from diversity, and then of course the conversation can also be about, do we have enough different experiences and what would help us to?
Yeah, because some people, they also commented that they had no diversity initiatives, but that was mainly because they had more than 50% women, which is also an interesting take, that there's only a diversity initiative if there are too many men. How do you feel, or how do you think about that?
Well, I guess that in every organization, so to get back, for example, to the research that I presented that we did in academia in the Netherlands, even if there is a balance of, in this case, women and men, then you can still examine whether the image that we have of success, the people that we promote, if that's a very narrow definition of success, then you can still say we are all, we don't have a diverse idea of what success can look like. So having a gender-balanced organization is a nice start, but then still you can examine, well, are we lacking on other kinds of diversity? And also, again, do we have, are there multiple ways to be successful in this organization? Are we valuing different career paths, different expertise?
So add maybe to that the fact that if we look at norms and stereotypes, organizations themselves are not static, right? They're dynamic organisms. They're constantly changing. There are people coming and going. So whether we're looking at society or organizations, we need to be aware that we need to have a continued conversation around diversity and inclusion, and maybe not just in relation to gender, but in relation to other minorities as well. And that's something that will continually change as the organization changes, I would think.
Yep.
That's a good one. I also got one question. It was all related to your question. It raised a lot of questions, Belle. But this one also relates to you, I think, Mara. Because in your presentation, Belle, you said that a lot of trainings or a lot of efforts all focus on fixing the women. And a lot of people reacted, how do we fix the men? And how can I, as a man, contribute to a better work floor or a better at-home situation? So maybe I start with you, Mara.
Well, I think I try and get away from the idea that we need to fix people, right? Because it implies somehow that someone's doing something wrong. And I think that
it's very mechanic as well.
Well, that, and it has a very normative connotation to it. And I think for us as academics, one of the biggest things we can do is to identify the inequalities that are there. And as I was trying to mention, you know, the complexity of it all. But thinking about whether or not people are actually aware of what's going on. And for example, I often get the question, you know, in the Netherlands, a lot of people work part-time and the women are taking care of the kids because that's what they want. And I would say as a sociologist or social scientist, yes, but if you made those same people aware of how those choices are shaped by the society in which they live, would they make those same choices? And I think that research we've done in other countries is showing that when fathers are actually given a chance to take time off around the birth of a child, and to care for their child on their own, they start looking at it differently than they did when they didn't have those opportunities. And as long as there's a sense that we don't need to change the system, then we continue to say that people are making individual choices.
Thank you. Belle?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think to answer the questions of what can men do, indeed, I think that currently when we have meetings about diversity and inclusiveness, it's often women who come and discuss and put in time to work on that. You see it all in every organization that the people working on diversity and inclusion are often women. Also in research, it's gender equality is studied mainly by women. So I think that we miss out on the insights that men can have there. Also because gender equality is not only about women. There is also a lot the opportunities that men don't get because their opportunities are also gendered. So I would invite them to the table and ask them to join these forces and to join these discussions and to question what we are currently studying and question things in the system that they see from their perspectives are not optimal.
Yeah. Very important and relevant advice, I think. We have time for one last question. And that is one I will ask you both. That is blind spots. Where do you think the blind spots are in, for you, I think organizations, maybe for you, Mara, in governments or policies?
Yep.
Go.
I think in relation to government policies, one of the biggest blind spots, which is slowly getting better, is the connections between various policy domains. Because if you start looking at paid work, which is part of one ministry, and childcare or paid leave, which might be parts of different ministries. Trying to actually get those government aspects to coordinate and discuss with each other to give an entire package that will actually address gender inequality is a very difficult issue. And it's very easy to get kind of a tunnel vision. So for me, one of the biggest blind spots is seeking out those interconnections between policy areas and making sure that we address them, because we can't see these policy domains separately to address gender inequality effectively.
Yeah, to add to that, if I can add one thing, it would be if I focus on what can organizations do, is to get away from the idea that gender equality is women's work, and also that the opportunities that gender equality offers are only for women. So concretely, what I'm trying to work with several organizations is to put more emphasis on combining work and care for fathers, because in our own research we see that that benefits fathers, makes them make different choices, but see more opportunities. But also it improves opportunities for women, because in organizations in which having kids is not something for women, but is something for people in a certain age range, gender equality improves, because having kids is not gendered anymore.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. This was the first keynote lecture of today. This lecture will be recorded and it will be subtitled. So if you missed it, no worries, we got you covered. If you want to see the whole program, go to our website uu.nl/IWD. And if you still want to share your thoughts with us or have ideas for next year's celebration, please contact us at ivdiwd@uu.nl. Thanks everyone.
My name is Maha, and I am from Yemen.
Hello, I'm Talita. I'm 25 years old.
My name is Krista Etlinger, and I'm from the United States.
We felt it was our responsibility as lifelong feminists and campaigners for equality to pass on hope and solidarity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.